Hello, before we start our main podcast, just a warning that unfortunately this episode contains an occasional word that some listeners may find offensive. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud, Season 1, Episode 10. My name's Andrew Jones.
And my name's Neil Greggor, and we're back again.
Back again. So how are you, Neil?
Yeah, good. No complaints.
Good. It's April. It's, well, time for people to start making some silage if they haven't done so already.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good thing to invite our guest today. So our guest is Colin Hanson-Orr from Forage Tech. Welcome, Colin.
Hello there.
How are you?
Yeah, really good. Well, when I say really good, I'm lying. I could give you a list of replacement parts that have gone in the last couple of years, and I've worked out that in actual fact, with new eyes and a new hip, on average, I'm getting younger every year. But obviously, the problem here is that I have been doing silage for 50 odd years.
I was going to say, you're a busy man from what you told me. This morning you had a webinar, was it Asia sort of way? And once you finished with us, you've got a webinar for the Americas, I believe, as well.
Yes.
So a busy man. But like you say, we thought we'd talk silage additives. And I'll be honest with you, as I probably said to you, I would. Until the last few years, I suppose 4, 5, 6 years, I used to think there was a lot of muck and magic in silage additives, and I think there still is a lot of muck and magic in silage additives. But I've certainly learned that there are times when you should use silage additive. But obviously, you've been dealing with silage additives for a long time. But let's talk about you first, Colin. So where's your background? What do you do for Forage Tech? And, well, how did you get to where you are? Because I believe ag bags come into the mix somewhere along the line and all sorts of different bits and pieces.
Right. You're going to be sorry you asked this.
Well, I'll give you 5 minutes, Colin, on this particular part.
Well, that'll cover the first 20 years. Yeah, basically, I was the child of RAF parents, so I wandered around the world with them, various parts, until I was about 16, 17. Then I started wandering by myself. I became a rock musician and spent a fair bit of time in Germany, very successfully. We were a group that was signed to the same label as Pink Floyd and Deep Purple and the Edgar Broughton Band. But
so would we know the band or not?
Janus.
Okay.
Still active, but the point is this, that the other guys like Pink Floyd and Deep Purple were doing okay. But do you remember the phrase from the 60s and 70s, sex, drugs and rock and roll?
Certainly do.
I'm too young for that, Colin.
Well, we were so busy concentrating on the first two that we sort of forgot about the third. And the record company got quite agitated as we were supposed to be actually making records. So anyway, we had a 2-year unforgettable, in fact, we did forget it, party.
Yeah.
For a couple of years. We then got thrown out of Germany, came back to England, and I think about 1976, I was working for a company that was importing soya beans into the UK in the animal feed trade. And I sat at my desk one day and thought, you know what? I think emigrating to the Falkland Islands is a really good idea. So about 6 months later, I land with a wife and 2 children, 2 little children in the Falkland Islands. And I'm taken in a Beaver seaplane from Port Stanley to a settlement called Fitzroy. And if anybody remembers the Falklands War, where the Welsh Guards were bombed, was actually Fitzroy, not Bluff Cove. And that was within like 50 to 100 yards of where my house was. Wow. But 1976, 1977, it simply wasn't working. So came back to the UK, went to agricultural college, did dairy herd management with the intent. Oh, sorry, I missed an important bit. When I got off the Beaver seaplane in Fitzroy, the farm manager met me and he said, "These 3 are your cows. Here are some hens. And if you want any mutton, just go kill a sheep in the shed." And that was my introduction to farming. But actually, when I say it was my introduction, it was also milking 3 South American longhorns. I think they were South American longhorns crossed with Satan. So they were they were extremely difficult to handle. The first time he says, you know, you're best to tie the back feet together before you milk them. And I think, hey, you think I'm some green chap. He was you really needed to. So anyway, I arrive back in England, I do college, and I start various activities in agriculture, get a job, which was pretty much repping for a company called Criddles. During the first year or two, I did okay. I learned an awful lot, and I learned far more from the farmers than I learned from the college. But that then parked me in a position where a guy turned up at Criddles one day and he said, we've got this new amazing form of silage additive. It's bacteria for silage. And they thought, well, who do we know who's daft enough to test bacteria for silage? And naturally, I got the job. So I tested for the first year, the first biological additive. And I went back to them and said, right, no chance, it's rubbish, doesn't work at all, makes no difference. I'll quote my friend from the future, Andrew, it's all muck and magic. Yeah. So, in fact, there was no magic, it was just muck. So that then proved my ability as a researcher, because about a year later, somebody was selling about 200,000 tons treatment of it. So sure. I was wrong, or their marketing was superb.
Yeah.
So on we roll, and then 1984, I started a business, which another 2 years later became Agbag Europe PLC. 84, I think between 84 and 85, I had my design on probably half the silage additives that were on sale in the UK. I was formulating them. And that was because a little earlier, a Danish company called Christian Hansen's, who are the world's biggest biotech company now, they were probably then as well, they'd come up with a different kind of angle on bacteria for silage, and there was no question that that worked. So from there to now has been a constant evolution. Agbag, we did reasonably well. We set up a national contracting service. The American manufacturers of the machines liked it so much they bought into the company. I had been doing ag bags at £7 to do a ton. Within a year, they were asking for £12.50, at which point I thought, this is time to leave. So I sold up my shares, and it was, I think, 92, and I retired. So I retired to our little farm, because we have our own farm, 140 acres in Derbyshire, and set off being a farmer. And you know what? After a month of that, I went, this is bloody hard work. So it's like, you know, what can I do? I know, I'll go back to being a rep. So I started feed business. 2001, Lloyd's Animal Feeds bought that feed business off me. So I retired and sort of went back and watched my missus farming, because she was way better at it than I was. And I'm not joking, seriously, she's the best stockman I've ever met. And just because I broke the JCB, she wouldn't let me use any of the machinery after that. So this is how we proceed. And then I'm not going to bore you with the intervening years. I took a sabbatical for about 8 years and taught in sixth form in university, but I was teaching music technology as opposed to the agricultural side. Kept my involvement in agriculture. I was still partially involved in consultancy work in silage and silage additives. I had some ideas. And so right back from 89, I'd been investing personally in research, and I developed things. And then we came to a point, the products that I was developing were starting to run into EU difficulties with not so much registration, but the use of. I was using bacillus organisms that the EU, and to be fair, our regulatory authorities weren't very enthusiastic about, do we say. So my good friends at Hanson's were working on various things. So I started getting them to make stuff for me. That led to 2015. Their tech guy left. And so they said, would I sort of take over as the consultant for the company, handling basically Europe. So supporting the distributors, supplying the technical backup, and problem solving. So it looked like a really good opportunity. They said, you know, come up to Copenhagen and we'll have a discussion. So we went up to Copenhagen. I thought, great excuse. So I took the wife, new wife, second crop, and the two new children. So we took them up to Copenhagen, and to be fair, I didn't really think this was going anywhere, but I thought it was a good opportunity. So we had a lovely couple of days, and then I sat down with the chief at Hanson's, and he said, you know, this is what we want you to do, and you know, tell us, you know, what you charge. So I named a ridiculous figure, knowing full well there's no chance, and he said, yep, that's fine.
Not enough then, Colin.
Yeah, mistake. So anyway, that meant I was then, you know, a couple of days, 2-3 days a week, I'd be jumping on airplanes and flying to different places. And again, looking back, it was the most valuable 2 to 3 years of my life. In agricultural life, I should stress. It was a case of I met people who did the job better than we do. I saw methods that were better than the way we made silage. I saw ways of feeding, housing, looking after cows.
Yeah.
That education served me really well as we now come up to modern day, as I try to, I look forward, and I think somebody said to me the other day, can you describe biological farming? And you know, as quick as somebody who isn't as old as me, I said, yes, the future.
Yeah.
And it is the future. And it was a case then of saying everything that we're doing is now going to hinge back. Intensive farming is dead, even though most people don't realize it. It's finished. Now it's not necessarily organic farming, but how do you produce crops without fertilizer? And then, you know, I'm sorry, you interrupt me anytime you feel like it, but basically my take is this. All the years I've worked, one of the most misunderstood aspects of feeding cows is protein. I mean, yep. I come from an era where I was going out problem solving on farms, and you'd go to farms and you'd see genuinely sick cows losing weight, acidotic, and you'd look and they'd be feeding them sort of like masses of wheat, rapidly fermentable starch, lowering rumen pH. And on top of that, somebody had been from the compounder and said, we've got this fantastic new 22% protein nut.
Yeah.
And they were pumping this into cows and wondering why they only had a lifespan of 2 lactations.
Yeah.
And it wasn't the farmer's fault. The farmers were taking the advice. It was the industry's fault. So I'm flying against that. So with protein, now we look forward and we go, right, we're a dairy farmer. We're going to be under horrendous constraints. They're going to penalise for 10 different sustainability objectives. So our efficiency of what we collect from the field and put into the cow has to increase. But there are constraints. When we get to protein, right, what's the compounder offering now? Well, now the compounder has to feed your cows 14% protein or less. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? But if you take protein and you do this, well, what happens is protein breaks down. It's simply chains of amino acids, and it breaks down into lots and lots of amino acids chained together called a polypeptide, a few amino acids chained together called a peptide, and then the basic amino acid. So if you looked at the bacteria that the ruminant produces, for every 100 grams of protein, she would be expecting the bacteria to deliver 2.1%, 2.1 grams. That is methionine, that amino acid. Quite simply, if the diet delivers 1.8, no matter what the crude protein says, she's short of protein. So then we put that in context. Where did your protein come from to date? It came from soya. Most things were soya based. Now we look at your sustainability figure. Soya is gone. You can't use soya. Well, that's okay. That's good, because now we're not chopping down the rainforest to get protein. We're going to grow it. We're going to grow rape. Hello, Mr. Cabbage Leaf Flea Beetle. It now says, thank you very much for planting all that rape, and you go and it's gone. But there's some very fat cabbage leaf flea beetles. And the only thing that you could get rid of them with was banned. So now growing rape is a lottery. So are we going to grow rape? No, we're not. So where are we going to get it from? Well, possibly we can import it. Do anybody see the fallacy in this already?
Yeah.
So it's all right. The compounder says it's not a problem because he's got access to distillers' grains. Great stuff. Distillers' grains. Where do they come from? They come not from distillers so much now, but from bioethanol plants. where does 700 million litres of bioethanol go? It goes into our cars. Oh, wait, our cars all have to be electric in 5 years.
Yeah.
So tell me again where my protein's coming from.
Yeah.
Right, what do we do? I'll tell you what. Somebody says the best way forward is for our farmers to start growing alfalfa stroke lucerne. Yeah. Has anybody tried to grow alfalfa stroke lucerne in our climate, in our soils? It can be done, but it's no way is it the same kind of volume, quality that you get in other parts of the world. We can't do it. We grow grass. Yeah. So how are we going to grow higher protein grass? We can do it. It's multi-cutting. That's costly. And if we're not intensive farming, the economics start to look pretty grim. So we have to start thinking very different about how we feed the cows and what we do with silage.
Taking a step back then, Colin, because that's where we are.
Yep.
Silage additives. I remember AdSafe, which obviously came from AdF.
Yep.
And that would have been, where are we talking now? Oh, blimey, 30, 35 years ago for sure, probably 40 years ago, AdF came.
Yep.
You talked about the one that you do. So where did silage additives start, and where have they gone to today?
Long way. They go back a long way. You had people using sulfuric acids and formic acids in the 19th century.
Okay. Wow.
And the concept, but they may not have known the science of it. But the concept is very simple. When people make silage, what they're doing is they're taking a crop which, if you wish it to remain feedable or fresh for any length of time, has to be pickled.
Yes.
So we know that if we pickle eggs in acetic acid vinegar, then they will stay there in that jar for years, because the acetic acid will prevent the growth of bacteria and yeasts and molds. Yeah. So acetic acid is a great thing. If you can't do that, what you do is you say, right, I've cut this great pile of grass or whole crop or maize or whatever, and now I need it to be pickled. So if you use acid, and you have to use significant amounts, 4 or 5 litres to the ton, AdSafe was simply the salt of the acid. As soon as it is in water, it became the acid, formic acid. So that then causes an instant pH drop. So your pH of your product, if your grass coming in might be 6.5, bang, you've hit it with a great ruck of acid, the pH drops to 4. At 4, you have stopped the nasty bacteria growing and eating all the sugar. Mm. So you've retained the nutritional value, but again, there was always a downside. One of the downsides was all your clothes melted if you were the one actually making stuff.
Yes.
The second was your skin came off after that.
Your machinery rusted.
It's meant to be.
Yeah, I know, but it wasn't a problem because you claimed it was stolen because it had vanished.
Yeah, just old.
So it's the acid became better and better in terms of the use, and I don't think at any particular time a majority of farmers would have used acid. It was just too dangerous, too difficult. And for instance, when you use a strong acid, you do get that pH drop and you do get some conservation, but what you also get is a rupturing of the plant cells. So you increase the effluent output. Once you bust a plant cell, all the nutrition is pouring out of it in the effluent. So downside. Also, I mean, again, I'm old enough to remember the ICI rep. And the ICI rep goes to the farm and he says to the farmer, how's your crop looking? And he, oh, you know, the grass isn't doing so well. When are you cutting? In 2 weeks. Well, bang another bag of nitrogen on. That'll get some grass. And people did. And the next thing is they had a really dark green sludge in their pit.
Levels.
Yes, and stank. And no amount of acid or anything solved it. So it was utterly the wrong advice, but people took it because it came from a major who should have known what they were talking about. But again, what they wanted to do was sell nitrogen. Understandable. So as we go forward, people tried variations. They used things like formaldehyde and formic acid, sulfuric acid, propionic acid. They all have that in common, acid. They're difficult to handle and they all have downsides. Yeah. So round about 1979 in the UK, possibly a year or two earlier in the US, the idea of using bacteria began to get sway and publicized. And this is a different concept. The idea is that grass, for instance, on a dry matter basis, you understand what I mean by dry matter basis, but for any listeners, it's think of it this way. You measure up a silage clamp and you go, how much is in it? And somebody says there's 1,000 tons of silage there. You say, what is the dry matter? They say 25%. And you say, no, there is 750 tons of water there and 250 tons of silage. That's dry matter. It's very different.
Yeah.
So the idea that in that dry matter, a proportion of it, 10, 20%, is actually what's called water soluble carbohydrates, sugars. And again, here there are many, many faults or misunderstandings. The sugar that we often measure on a silage analysis is of glucose, sucrose, fructose, the basic, what you call hexose sugars. But there are other classes. There are pentoses sugars, there are oligosaccharide sugars. There's a large amount of sugar wrapped up in a fiber called pectin. There's various things that we don't consider. However, when you add bacteria, they, with one or another degree of efficacy, will convert that sugar to predominantly lactic acid. And they will do it fairly quickly. So 24, 48 hours, they might have dropped the pH down to 4. And if they did that, they've achieved the same objective, but they've done it without rupturing plant cells, and they've done it in what is nature's way. However,
this is where you and I started talking originally, wasn't it? Because I saw you give a conversation.
Yes.
And I know there are others in the industry who say I'm talking rubbish, but I'm sorry, I've seen it time and time again on farm.
Yep.
High lactic acid in silage is a good thing because it shows that it's had a good fermentation and it's doing what it's supposed to be. But however, high lactic acid is not good for cows. And if I had one exactly this winter that we went on farm, and because they've not got a dilution of other forages, it was just the silage. You went on there, you looked at their lactic acid levels, and that's what it was. As soon as we put something to try and counter that, and in their situation, it was just some bicarb, and the cows just chomped their way through loads of it.
Yeah.
You know, and I know there's others in the industry say, oh, no, it's not a problem unless it's above a certain level. I'm sorry, I totally disagree. It's a lower level. Funnily enough, the same marker level I use, I then heard in a webinar from the States a couple of years ago, and they were talking about heifer diets, and it happened to be exactly the same marker in terms of lactic acid levels. So yes, as you say, lactic acid, if you're looking for someone looking at a silage analysis, the higher your lactic acid, that shows you've had a good fermentation. However, your cows can't cope with high levels of lactic acid, which is then where you and I started talking further, because like, oh, someone else actually gets what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, absolutely, Andrew. And as I say, again, the complexities. When you look at silage and you see high levels of lactic acid, what you see is the perfect growth media for both lactate assimilating yeasts and other yeasts. Those yeasts are the things that create the heat, and they're creating it from that excess lactic acid. But they also then raise the temperature to the point where molds grow. And when the molds grow, they produce these things called mycotoxins, which the farmer is now buying lots of binders to get rid of.
Yeah.
Yes.
The trick is don't get them in the first place, because there's no binder that gets rid of all of them. And also that's something that is coming up. The dairies will very soon be testing milk for mycotoxins, so you can't afford them in many respects. I had, obviously, when I started AgBag, one of the wonderful things about an ag bag is that you get the crop, you put it through the machine packs it in the lower area at the same density as you'd get 30 foot down in a tower. The thing is pushing it in. So as it pushes it in, the higher up you go, the less dense it becomes. When you first open an ag bag, it has been completely anaerobic, free of oxygen. No oxygen starves most of the pathogens, so they don't do any damage. But what we found with our ag bags was we made the best silage in the world. It was perfect, wonderful, tasty as anything. Cows loved it. Within a week or so, there would be a horseshoe of material at the top that was starting to warm. If you're in California and you're going through half an ag bag a day, it's distinctly not a problem. If you're 1,000 foot up in the hills of Derbyshire and you're using a foot a day, it is a problem. And what it turned out, and I spent a lot of money at Cranfield Institute of Biotechnology at the time, was we looked and we went, what's going on? And it turns out the better you make the silage, the more prone it is to that kind of aerobic instability. The yeast and molds just love it. Yep. Going back a second, when you look, Andrew, and you see the analysis and it goes 26 dry matter, 160 grams of lactic acid, like me, your heart sinks. Because you know I've got cows now that will be spitting sort of cud bores and spitting saliva, and people don't get it. What you've done there is you've caused excess salivation. And if you said to a cow, what are the 3 worst tasting things on the planet, the cow would go, that's easy. It's shit, followed by spit, followed by snot. That's what she'd tell you. And then we get a really highly lactic silage that is acidic and doesn't taste nice. I put it in front of the cows and they all rub their noses in it to move it around to find a tasty bit. And when they finish doing that and they're chewing it, they're drooling. So if he's managed to get some shit on the way in, he's got a full house. He's got 3 things that are going to say to the cows, yeah, don't eat me. And then what are we going to do? Oh, we've got a cow with a potential intake of 28 kilos of dry matter, but she's only eating 10 of silage. I know, I'll give her 18 kilos of concentrate. No. So that's why, to a large extent, you have an issue. And again, just sort of digressing slightly, the silage analysis you need is the one that actually looks at what's in the silage in terms of calcium, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, sulfur, and the trace elements, because that is the critical part. That's what causes or is responsible for what is known as the buffering capacity. So the buffering capacity is scientifically the ability to withstand pH change, i.e. a high buffering capacity means that the bugs don't get the pH down to 4, but they keep munching away at the sugar to the point that the sugar's gone. And here's something contentious for you. You'll read from our advisory bodies and from experts, and you can almost hear the inverted commas, experts, that to get a successful silage inoculant, you need to apply 1 million colony forming units of the bacterium per gram of grass. And it needs to be, quote, homofermentative. Let's just back up. First of all, bacteria have a particular form. They arrive and they have something called a lag phase. And the lag phase is they're waiting until the temperature's right and the environment's correct and there's a food and a substrate. Then they'll begin to grow. That's called the log phase. The log phase is where they grow like crazy. And that's when they're expressing and creating everything. So a homofermentative bacterium would take the sugar, and this isn't all it makes, by the way, it just converts to sugar.
Homofermentative is just one type of bacteria, isn't it?
Yes, yes. And what it'll do is it'll make lots of lactic acid from the sugar.
Yeah.
In a high buffering area, it will keep going. And when it's exhausted the hexoses, the glucose, what it does is it goes, I've run out of food. I know, I'll eat the pentoses instead. The pentoses have a big role in the silage and in the cow. But off we go with our homofermentative bacterium, and it's one of the worst converters in the pit. It's not making lactic acid, it's making a bit of that, a bit of carbon dioxide, a bit of water, a bit of ethanol. It's a proper waster. So high buffering capacity, homofermented bub, you've got a problem. But also, back up again, most of them like a pH a little bit lower. pH isn't a little bit lower when it arrives. So let's say they double every 30 minutes in a perfect world. They might be sitting there for 6 or 12 hours before they start working. In the meantime, if you put a bacteria on that doubled every 15 minutes and it didn't have a lag phase, you'd probably have 1 million of them by the time the other one started. They've already finished their log phase. So farmers are being badly advised. Some of the information that's out there is scientifically illiterate. And we need, as an industry, to have that discussion. But until our regulatory bodies and advisory bodies catch up with the 21st century, we're not going to have that conversation.
Well, like I said, there's a lot of muck and magic out there still, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. Yeah. I mean, I'm conscious that what I don't want to do, I know this is a podcast and it's the three of us having a chat. Well, one of us having a chat and two listening.
It's really interesting. Carry on.
Yeah, I'm sort of an expert at that. In the work that I do with Christian Hansen, I do not wish to sound like a fanboy, but I am. And obviously, the work that I do with them and the work that we do in silage inoculants takes us to a completely different realm. And partially, let me just put it in context. Christian Hansen's supply 50% of the world's bacteria in production in dairy, in cheese and yogurt. 50%.
We're not talking about from on farm. We're talking processing of dairy, aren't we, when you say that?
Mm.
Yeah. And 75% of the UK cheese and yogurt is created with Hansen cultures.
Yeah.
So they have a library of, I think it's 50,000 fully mapped bacteria. That goes on all the time. They have 750 full-time scientists. Their R&D budget exceeds the budget of most of our major companies. They are on a scale that nobody else is close to. So when they do research to the nth degree, which means that I look at what they've got and the science that they're coming up with, and I'm just constantly, enthralled. It is amazing. So now when we look at a silage additive, and I won't name names, so I'm not promoting anything, I'm promoting the technology.
Mm-hmm.
What they've come up with is bacteria that reduce dry matter losses quite significantly. So the amount that you cut in the field is a lot nearer to that figure when you're feeding it to the cows. Because for most people, they're not aware that the normal figure from field to cow is 27% dry matter loss. That's in the UK. So it's almost the equivalent, 27%. It's almost the equivalent of saying, right, just deliver me 20 tons of dairy cake and blow 5 tons in the midden on the way past. We're literally watching a large part of the nutrition go. With the Hansen technology, a large part of that remains. So that's point one. Point two, we are moving into a world right now where we have to start thinking, how much can we actually get from the grass? How much can we get from whole crop? How much can we get from maize? But predominantly grass. That's what we feed dairy cows on. So when we feed in dairy cows, what's their limits? What's their limits on silage, for instance? And the answer is most nutritionists sit down and they do a diet and they estimate the cow's intake will be about 11 or 12 kilos of silage dry matter.
I'd say that's disgusting because I've got clients doing 16.5 plus.
Yeah,
right.
You have, and that's the right level. But what affects it?
We're feeding ruminants, not monogastrics.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like to eat grass.
Yeah.
Yeah, two things are critical to intake. There is another area, but if I can remember when I finished this. The first thing is NDF, neutral detergent fibre. Most cows hit a ceiling when 1.1% of the dry matter they eat is NDF. So if you have a semi-old silage, they'll eat a lot less than they would of a younger one.
That's of it, yes, definitely.
If they eat a younger silage and it breaks down rapidly, let's say it's full of lactic acid, and then it breaks down rapidly in the rumen and creates more lactic acid limits intake.
Yeah.
So when people are aware of that, the next thing that limits intake, and this is again, when was the last time you looked at a silage analysis and it listed polyphenols or alkaloids or terpenes? No, never. What's them? They are the volatiles that tell the cow, oh, that's tasty, I'll eat it. So can you make stimulatory things? Yes, you can. So I'm just going to back up slightly. The Hansen technology, the bacteria that they've developed, and some of these are patented, increase NDF digestibility by up to 10%. So they reclaim hard fibre into a digestible form from the NDF. But more importantly, they're raising that threshold. They're raising the threshold for the intake. Hugely important. They stop the production. The breakdown of protein is critical. We need protein, and if we can get it from grass, great. But to get that protein, you have the normal activity of bacteria. Let's say you have an accident, you've got slurry in it, you've got soil in it, it's been a rotten period, it's had no sunshine, so it's a bit rich in nitrogen, and you know what's going to happen if you make silage, it's going to be stinky butyric stuff. Why? clostridial bacteria. They sit there and they wait for their opportunity. And you have the obvious suspects, Clostridium tyrobutyricum, Clostridium paraputreficum, and you even have the nasty things like Clostridium perfringens. They're sitting there in the grass waiting for an opportunity. Let them grow, they'll grow, and they'll make your cows sick. Not only will they cause problems in palatability and intake, they will make the cows sick. They'll cause hemorrhages, they're terrible. One of the Hansen bacteria literally kills 99% of them. You put that on, bang, they're gone. They're not a problem.
Take a step back there, Colin. Forget about the Hansen bacteria for a minute. What should people look for a good silage additive? Because let's be honest, there are others out there. There are lots of out there. What's the good thing to look for a good silage additive?
There's people who have set off on different lines, but pretty much everybody has caught up to the point that they realise that it's all very well having. I think one of you said that there is a point at which people go, right, the silage analysis is good, but what does it do in front of the cow? So the silage analysis doesn't pick up some of the things. If we have a ceiling on what we can feed cows because of the cost, what we can feed the soil in terms of the cost of the fertilizer, we've got to start thinking about rebalancing. Could you just remind me of your original question, because I've wandered off again?
What do people need to look for to see a good silage additive? Because obviously lots of different ones out there.
Yes,
what should people look for to look for one?
What are the danger zones?
Without you've mentioned Hansen, but how about there's others out in the market? So what are good ones for people to look for? Without necessarily naming a product, but what they. I'm not going to name a product, but
there's some bad press for Lactobacillus buchneri, and there are a couple of very good buchneri out there. And a buchneri is classed as a
type of bacteria now. When we say that,
the bacteria is a heterofermentative bacteria, which means on paper it's a less efficient bacteria than plantarum. It isn't as good at converting lactose because it produces a mole of lactate and a mole of acetic. But the point is this: the acetic acid is the thing that stops the yeasts and molds. Therefore, it has relevance. And again, in one company's case, and I'm assuming you'll guess who, the buchneri does its job in 48 hours. Therefore, the patented bacteria I was talking about mean that you can literally open a silage after a week. Nobody else has that kind of technology. So I'm not trying to promote. What I'm saying to you is the technology I'm referring to is a different league. In fact, I can quote you the chairman of one of the competitors you're talking about. It's a decent product. There's nothing wrong with what they sell. He sat in a meeting with somebody we know and said there's been nothing new in silage for a decade apart from that blink, 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 bleep, bleep, Silosolve. That's what he said. And that is the truth. So even though, the technology exists, you can buy a silage additive and it will do a decent job in terms of keeping the silage, reducing the heating, possibly improving the shelf life. There's nothing else that will do what the Hansens do in terms of improving the nutrition. And the killer, it changes the volatiles. The cows go, I'm going to eat a lot of that. And like you say, Andrew, we deal with a leading consultancy group, and they monitor. The farms they're on, which currently are 50% of the UK farms, accounting for 65% of the dairy cows, they monitor, and they have cows, as you say, managing 16, 17 kilos of dry matter intake. That's where you need to be. And when you put additives on that actually interfere with that and prevent that kind of intake, you're doing yourself and your pocket a disservice.
If you're talking about who I think you're talking about, I was, before COVID, went to a farm where one of their consultants was, and they were getting excited because they finally hit 12.5 kilos of forage input. And I was with a colleague at the time. We looked at each other thinking, well, that should be an absolute minimum.
Yeah.
As I say, I've got a client I was with last week, you know, we're doing 16.5, 16.7 kilos of forage. Obviously, it's not just grass, because obviously having a mixture helps, so whole crop and maize as well. But it's achievable, and it should be achievable, because we're dealing with ruminants, not monogastrics.
Yeah. Well, I had the pleasure of working with. He's one of the best farmers I've ever had the privilege to know, let alone work with, for a lot of years. And he was a 2-time Gold Cup winner.
Yep.
And one year we were just out of idle curiosity measuring. And that was then, and this we're talking 20, 25 years ago, and they were averaging, and I think this was 30-something% heifers, 27 kilos of dry matter intake a day. Yeah. That's why he was winning the Gold Cup, because his cows were full, and the conversion of that food into milk was superior to anybody else's. So the lesson was clear decades ago.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when should you or shouldn't you use an additive? Because certainly there's still, you know, if the sun's shining and everything's right, is there a need to use an additive? And I mean, certainly the lessons I've learned is for anything that's got a leaf in it, so a clover or a plantain, that should definitely be used an additive, because they act as a buffer and stop the process of pulling that pH down. So when are not good times to be using additives? Are there a time you can get away with not using an additive, and when should you definitely use an additive?
I think that's basically the case of two different ideas, two different philosophies.
Yep.
If your belief is that an additive is there to stop the silage going bad, then you can make good silage with sunshine and good management. You can.
Yep. Yes.
If, on the other hand, what you're after is a technology that retains higher levels of dry matter, in all the trial data I've ever seen, what I'm talking about is yielding 5% recovery of dry matter. So if you said silage is worth £50 a ton for whatever, in 100 tons, you've got 5 tons of silage extra. £50 a ton, 200 is 500. Yeah, 250 quid. So basically, you're getting back £2.50 straight away if it did nothing else.
Yeah.
If that same treatment is releasing a 10% improvement in the fibre digestibility, the NDF digestibility, that's the equivalent of something like 0.5, 0.6 of a megajoule of energy. Now let's just convert that. Those NDF figures normally would, if they're now no longer indigestible, they move across to D value. If they move to D value, every gain of D value is 0.23 litres of milk per cow. So let's say, let's be really generous and say we're only going to gain half a litre. You work that out and you're making a fortune in terms of the thing. So I can go on. The protein retention, it isn't converting, because again, if you look at protein, when you're making ammonia in the silage from clostridial or enterococcal fermentation, you're actually making things like biogenic amines. Biogenic amines, you'll know histamine. Histamine is terrible because it's an inflammatory, it's part of people's immune system, but it's there to inflame. And when you put it in a cow's diet, as she's ingesting it, A, it can transmit into the milk, and one day they might start looking for it, but B, it has a direct effect on the animal's health. You're telling the animal to suffer inflammation. So all these things happen from good silage as well. Yeah. So that's what I say. It's a philosophy. If you want to stop silage going bad, and I'll tell you now, 2 years ago, I saw a university multi-choice question. When should you use a silage additive? And there was 4 options. The correct answer was when the weather's bad. Yeah. Now that wasn't even correct in the 19th century. But that's what they're teaching our kids. They're so utterly wrong. Sorry, I'll stop there.
That's great.
So, but when our situation, okay, let's go to the second part then, because you said it's two different. When should you definitely use one in terms of like with clovers or with leafy, herbal lays, anything like that? When should you definitely use a silage additive?
When can't you not?
Well, yeah.
It's like I have to be utterly honest and say to you, the same thing is true, which is that you're asking me the same question that you say to a guy who produces yogurt. He says, when should I use a culture? And then he throws some milk product in a tank and every so often lifts the top to see what's happened.
Hopes for the best. Yeah.
So it's like it's a technology which saves you money, makes you money. And the thing is, Andrew, you're smart. You're asking the questions like as if you don't know, which is very good. You'll convince most of the listeners, but I know better. So basically, we need to say the truth is it's not the additive, it's the man advising you. Right? If you've got a silage coming in and it's high buffering capacity, the solution might be different one way or the other. But the solution is ensuring that the population that's about to create the fermentation are appropriate. Using a bacterium that killed 99% of the Clostridia is pointless on 40% dry matter stuff that's likely to go yeasty. So how do we fix that? Well, we use bacteria that kill and inhibit yeasts and molds. So you, as the advisor, it's like part of your duty of care to the farmer is to say, right, we've looked at it, we've evaluated it, 2 days, 3 days before cutting. This is the right product. This is what we need to use. And from there, you will make a much better job and he will be a lot happier. And more importantly, so will his cows.
Yeah. Well, let's be honest. I could say I do think there's a lot of bad advice out there sometimes, but that's no different. I suppose you're saying about the ICI man all those years ago. It's because they're there to sell product, and it's, to me, it's not about that. It's about trying to always give the right advice. You might not always get it right yourself, but you always try to give the right advice. Yeah,
I think to be fair, I spoke mockingly, but the ICI man was probably simply a victim of the culture. He's working for a company that sell nitrogen, and they don't see it as, right, we've put the extra nitrogen on and we've made a terrible pile of blue stinkers.
He's done his part of making more grass.
Yes, he believes he's helped the farmers. So it's only when over a period of time people stop doing it because it's actually making the job worse that the industry catches up. Quite often you think the industry leads the farmer, but often it's the other way around. Farmers aren't daft, and it's like, when you first start in this game, I've spent 50 years just realizing how little I know. I started off knowing everything, and right now I understand about 10%. And you'd go into a farm, you're full of your college education, you've read God knows how many books, and there's some old bloke there with straw sticking out of his ears, bale of twine holding his trousers up. How can he possibly teach you anything? You should learn some humility and respect because he knew a bloody sight more than you did.
Oh, yes, I know. But funnily enough, I was with a client yesterday, sat down and went and had a cup of tea with his grandmother. And we were just talking about something, and she remembered this and that. And he said, oh, usually she tells us, and it's like, well, listen to her because she's the one that's been doing this for how many years.
Yeah.
She's got far more experience than even you or I have got. She knows what she's talking about and knows this farm. Listen.
Yep, 100%.
I obviously agree. Yeah.
They know their farms a lot better than we do.
Yeah. They do. And there's nothing in this world like granny wisdom.
Nothing.
No, that's very good. So as much as I've tried to prize it out of you otherwise, really, your answer, Colin, is we should be using it all the time.
Yeah.
Yes.
And we should be using the right one.
Yes.
And your advisor should be telling you which one's the right one.
Yes.
But okay then, how do we have the market that we do with so many different ones available? Because there are hundreds, literally, of silage additives out there. I mean, someone I've never even heard of, you stumble across every once in a while.
Absolutely, and you can pick up the phone and you can get somebody to manufacture you one. It's dead simple. the thing is that, like most things in our industry, listen, and you'll hear from people. I used such and such, and it was a pile of, what. I used such and such, and I can't believe it.
Yeah.
We had when we became Forage Technology became the business partners for Christian Hansen's. I headhunted my daughters from the company that they worked for, because the company they worked for was the country's leading social media outfit. They did all the promo and social media for programs like Victoria and Poldark and Peaky Blinders. All these, they were doing that, and they were so successful. So they came into the business to handle the marketing and administration. And the first thing they said is, well, what proportion of farmers actually use an additive? And I went, it's surprisingly small. It's only 45%. So 55% don't use an additive.
Yep.
And they said, well, have you ever thought about challenging them? And I went, not really. So the next thing is, they tell me they found 3 farmers who are adamant they don't work. They've given them the product and arranged to film them all the way through.
Right.
So they filmed them all the way through. Those 3 are the best advert I've ever seen. I mean, it's my daughters, and I'm a very proud dad. But what they did was, those farmers, they were smart enough to say, it's different, it's done this, it's done that, and I am completely sold. I will use it from now on, and I'll tell other people to use it. And that's your best advertising.
Yeah.
So when it comes to how do I choose, look for the respect. I mean, I don't mean it disrespectfully. The companies that do sell other additives are decent people. They're good people, and their products are decent products, but they're not the Hansen products.
I listened to a talk very recently, and the guy spoke about it. He said that one of the things that we have to learn is that there's no black box that fixes everything.
Yes.
And he says, when somebody offers you that black box and tells you it fixes everything, go and research it and speak to people, and go on the internet and make sure that is what you're looking for. So I'm right with you.
Well, there's one thing when I'm talking, I suppose actually I'm talking to farmers now, hopefully, but when I'm talking to farmers at a meeting, one of Colin's cliches, there's a big box of them, is if you make shit silage and use our additive, you'll make shit silage with our additive.
Our additive, yeah. That's right. Yeah.
Well, exactly. You've got to get the basics right, haven't you? No matter what you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I work in the genetics world, and I always say that I can give you the best bull that you could possibly get. If you don't raise that calf properly.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes. Yeah. I have the same thing, but mine's bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah. Comes out of the same thing.
Yes.
That's absolutely right.
Oh dear. So I think we probably need to start thinking about drawing this to a close.
That was lovely.
But any more words of wisdom, and I will. Yeah, I'll say that I'll give you a time limit. You haven't listened to anything I've said so far, so
No.
Any words of wisdom, Colin, to finish this on what on what we're talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, Andrew, the fact that I don't listen, don't take it personally. I don't listen to anybody.
I don't. I know you well enough, Colin, that when you just want to go, you go.
I mean, even my daughters, they sort of, they have a particular signal if we're doing meetings, and it involves drawing their finger across their throat. So it's sort of like, I do understand. And I'm not offended if you interrupt. That's great.
Yeah, it's been great.
The beauty of being old is that you've lived through it and you've seen it over and over again. And in my years in this industry, decades in this industry, round it comes as a regular basis, more milk from forage.
Yeah.
And the point is this: how? Don't tell me I need more milk from forage. Tell me how.
Yeah.
Because biological farming, you think of it now, right? You're a Dutch farmer. Your government just said to you, you've got 2 choices. You can sell us your farm and we'll give you 10% above the market rate, or we'll compulsorily purchase it. We know what we're going to do. They are intending to reduce their livestock numbers by 50%, not 50. The ones that are left will have constraints on production like you can't believe in terms of the fertilizer. So they are basically being turned into organic farmers, whether they like it or not, and the numbers are going to decrease dramatically. Whether you're in the US, 30% of farmland is being put back into rewilding. Everywhere you look around the world, the livestock industry is going to come under incredible pressure. 2027 in the UK, you have to have every slurry store covered. And I again repeat to you a little conversation I had, and it is with one of our regulatory bodies. When they're covered, what's going to happen? Because you have now covered up all the bacteria that are producing the gases. Yes, that's to contain them. And you go, what do you think happens when you have a big sealed container with gases building up in it? And they went, I'm absolutely serious, you can vent them.
Well, what's the point of covering it to start with?
It's bureaucrats, Andrew. They haven't thought that far.
I know, but you know what I'm saying.
I do, and you won't like the answer. The answer is that this is intended, but being considered right now and probably implemented around about the same time, sulfuric acid treatment of slurry.
I know. I mean, I got to be honest with you, I was on an ALA sustainability webinar the other day. I was invited to be on one, and they talk through it, and you can see it. You and I have had conversations, and it's not for today, it's for another day, but it's like, you know, so much with acid, whatever, and that obviously comes because ALA are covering the UK,
yes,
Denmark, Sweden, and Central Europe, as they call it. And so, as you and I have discussed, well, that's what happens a lot in Denmark now, isn't it? It's acid is added to the slurry.
Yes, and we're not talking little amounts. And anyway, again, my response to that was to say, right, I come from an era in which the world was ending due to acid rain. Acid rain was the result of sulfur being pumped out by coal-fired power stations that went up into the atmosphere, bound through electrical energy and landed back as sulfuric acid. Yes. Sulfuric acid destroyed the soil microorganisms and killed trees, etc., etc. So, yes. So you're suggesting that dairy farmers in the UK have huge tanks full of concentrated acid rain, and they tip it on their fields, and you don't expect any consequences. It's not right. And again, you know, farmers are brilliant. They work stupid hours for no reward. They never get credit for what they do. Clarkson, for instance, doing a fantastic job, but you know, that's a guy with millions of pounds to solve the problem. Most of us don't have that luxury. So again, what's happening? We've had one brief chink of light break through the darkness. We had a year of 50 pence a litre. Where are we heading today? 43, 42. What's the current cost of production? 44. Oh no, here we go again. It's time that those poor farmers had some appreciation for what they do, how they do it. And I'll tell you what, if they're not there and they're left, just as a thought, do you know what they call lab-grown meat?
I wouldn't eat it, but go on.
They call it immortal cells because it's the same cells that are reproducing. Now, where in nature do you have cells that keep reproducing? And I say to my daughters, they should just call them tumour burgers.
I was going to say, that's cancer, yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, really, seriously? Unproven, we're going to start throwing that? I mean, it's all right. It'll be diluted with crickets.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. A cockroach and a cricket or two.
Yeah, I think I'd rather be a cannibal.
Yeah.
There you are. I've solved the obesity issue as well.
Yeah. And overpopulation at the same time.
Oh, yeah. Well, obviously, like usual, Colin, it's been a very interesting conversation with you. And like I say to all the time to our listeners, if you've got any, like to follow up any further questions from Colin, then please do email us at podcast@ChewintheCud.com or follow us on Twitter, which is @ChewintheCudPod. And we will quite happily pass on any questions you do have to Colin. Or you want to contact us about anything or whatever, basically, we are here. But really, I'd like to thank Colin for his time today. So thank you, Colin. And thank you, Neil. Any last words from yourself, Neil?
No, it was very interesting. I enjoyed it. Thanks, Colin.
No, thank you both for inviting me.
Yeah.
No. Thank you very much. It's been our pleasure. So thank you very much, everybody. Yeah. And we'll talk to you all again soon. So thank you.
Cheers.
boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of ChewintheCud Ltd. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of ChewintheCud Ltd, and the views of Neil Greggor are personal and may not be the views of Master Gen Ltd and any affiliated companies. Thank you for listening and goodbye.